She tried to speak, but no one was listening. The room was quiet, too quiet. Only the steady beep, beep, beep of a hospital monitor broke the silence. Dim lights, cold walls, a body lying still on the bed. To everyone watching, she looked unconscious, unaware, gone. But inside, her mind was awake, racing, screaming. She could hear the voices around her. She could feel the fear tightening in her chest. She knew something was wrong. And standing just a few feet away was the person responsible. The truth was trapped inside her, locked behind a body that refused to move, while her killer stood nearby, pretending nothing was wrong. So here's the question that haunts this story. How can someone witness their own murder and be completely powerless to stop it? Before she ever entered a hospital room, before her life was reduced to medical charts and police files, she was someone people trusted without question. She grew up in a home that valued closeness, even when life was unpredictable. Money was tight at times. Stress was familiar. But love, real, complicated love, was always present. From childhood, she learned how to read people quickly, how to sense tension before it turned into conflict, how to make herself small when situations felt unsafe. She was the kind of child who didn't ask for much, the kind who adjusted instead. Teachers described her as quiet but observant. Friends remember her as loyal, sometimes to a fault. She had a habit of giving people the benefit of the doubt, even after they'd shown her reasons not to. At her core, she believed in people. She believed that intentions mattered more than outcomes, and she believed that those closest to you were the least likely to hurt you. As she grew older, her dreams stayed modest but deeply personal. She wanted a stable life, a sense of control over her own future, a home where she could finally breathe without feeling like she had to be on guard all the time. But there was always something beneath the surface, a quiet anxiety she rarely spoke about, a fear of being abandoned, a fear of becoming invisible when she needed help the most. That fear followed her into adulthood. When health issues began to appear, they didn't arrive all at once. They came gradually, small symptoms she brushed off. Fatigue, dizziness, moments where her body didn't respond the way it used to. She told herself it was stress, that she could handle it, that asking for help could wait, until it couldn't. As her independence slipped, she did what she had always done. She leaned on the people she trusted. She depended on reassurance, on care, on the belief that vulnerability would be met with protection, not exploitation. Those close to her saw it as strength, her willingness to trust, her refusal to live in fear. But trust, when placed in the wrong hands, can become dangerous. Looking back, there were signs, moments when control replaced care, when concern felt conditional, when help came with invisible strings attached. Still, she didn't see it, because she had spent her entire life believing one thing above all else, that love meant safety. That being close to someone meant being protected, and that belief, that deeply human need to feel safe in someone else's care, would eventually place her in a position where her voice mattered most, and yet would not be heard. Long before the machines, long before the silence, long before she realized the truth, the path toward that hospital bed had already begun. In the months leading up to what would later be called the incident, her life appeared ordinary. She woke up early most days, followed routines that made her feel grounded. Small rituals, morning tea, a familiar playlist, checking messages before the day truly began. There was comfort in structure, comfort in predictability. She had responsibilities she took seriously, appointments to keep, people who relied on her. And on the days when her strength faded, she accepted help, grateful, but quietly uneasy about needing it. Those closest to her saw a woman trying her best to hold everything together. There was a partner who claimed to be supportive, a constant presence, always nearby, sometimes too nearby. Friends described them as inseparable, but some noticed the subtle shifts, the way conversations were interrupted, the way decisions were suddenly made for her rather than with her. There were also others in her orbit, a colleague who checked in, a caregiver who handled the practical details, people who interacted with her in brief, ordinary moments, never realizing how important those moments would later become. And then there were the warm moments. Laughter during quiet evenings, shared memories, jokes that only made sense to the two of them. Moments that looked like love from the outside, but beneath the surface, things were changing. Concerns she raised were brushed aside. You're overthinking. You're tired. It's just stress. She began to doubt herself. Decisions about her health, her schedule, even her communications, slowly stopped being hers alone. There were moments of tension that came and went quickly. A tightened jaw, a raised voice quickly softened. Questions that went unanswered. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. Just small things. Too small to alarm anyone, too frequent to ignore. And when she hesitated, when she seemed unsure, when something didn't feel right, she was reminded, gently but firmly, that she was being cared for, that she was safe. By the time anyone realized those reassurances were masking control, by the time the secrecy became visible, her life as she knew it was already slipping into something else, something darker. Looking back now, there were moments that didn't make sense at the time. Moments that felt small, harmless, easy to explain away. But hindsight has a way of sharpening details. There were days when her mood shifted without warning. Not anger, not sadness, just withdrawal. She became quieter, more hesitant, as if she were constantly weighing her words before speaking, as if saying the wrong thing might cost her something. People close to her noticed the physical changes first. She tired more easily, lost weight, complained of headaches and nausea that came and went, symptoms that were blamed on stress, on medication, on exhaustion. Nothing that raised alarms. Someone close to her, however, began behaving differently. Always present, always attentive, answering questions for her, explaining her symptoms before she could. It looked like concern. It sounded like care. But there were moments, brief, uncomfortable moments, when that concern felt rehearsed. She mentioned once that she didn't feel right, that something felt off inside her body. The response came quickly: reassurance, dismissal, a change of subject. She's just anxious. She worries too much. She doesn't always know what she's feeling. And slowly, that narrative stuck. She began second-guessing herself, apologizing for asking questions, minimizing her discomfort. Friends later remembered comments she made in passing, strange jokes about being tired of feeling tired, quiet remarks about not being in control of her own care. At the time, no one pressed further. There were warnings, too, subtle ones. A look she held a second too long. A pause before answering a simple question. A tension in the room when certain topics came up. But nothing concrete. Nothing provable. Just a growing sense that something wasn't right. A feeling that hovered, then faded, then returned. By the time those moments were re-examined, by the time the pieces began to form a pattern, it was already too late. Because the danger wasn't loud, it didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly, disguised as care, protected by trust, and hidden in plain sight. Before we go any further, pause with me for a moment. If you're still following this story, if the details are starting to feel unsettling, let me know you're here. Comment. I'm still here. And tell me where you're watching from, because stories like this reach people everywhere, and every perspective matters. If you're drawn to the truth hidden beneath ordinary lives, If you want to understand how crimes like this unfold quietly, without warning, consider subscribing to this channel, because what comes next reveals how everything you've heard so far connects, and why sometimes the most dangerous moments are the ones no one thinks to question. Now, let's continue. It happened without warning. One moment, she was going about her day, weak but managing. The next, her body gave in. She collapsed. Panic followed quickly, voices overlapping, someone calling her name, someone else calling for help. By the time the ambulance arrived, she was barely responsive. At the hospital, everything moved fast. Bright lights, cold hands, urgent questions fired into the air, answers supplied by someone else. Doctors worked under the assumption they'd seen before. Another patient in crisis, another body shutting down. She was placed on a bed, monitors attached, medication administered, and then silence. To everyone watching, she appeared unconscious, unresponsive, still. But inside, something terrifying was happening. She was awake. She could hear the machines, the beeping, the murmured conversations at the foot of the bed. She felt the pressure of hands moving her body, the sting of needles, the weight of her own limbs, heavy, immovable. She tried to move. Nothing happened. She tried to speak. Her mouth wouldn't open. Panic set in. Doctors noticed inconsistencies. Her vitals didn't match her presentation. Brain activity that suggested awareness, but no physical response. Reflexes that didn't align with the diagnosis being considered. Something didn't add up. She should be responding. She's too stable for this. This doesn't make sense. But time was limited. Decisions had to be made, and while charts were updated, while explanations were debated, she lay there, trapped inside her own body, fully aware, fully conscious, listening as the people around her discussed her condition, listening as someone very familiar stepped closer to her bedside, and realizing with growing horror that the person she trusted most knew exactly what was happening. She wasn't slipping away. She was being silenced. Once her condition was classified as suspicious, the hospital followed protocol. Authorities were notified. At first, it was routine, a formality, a box to be checked when a patient's collapse couldn't be easily explained. But as officers began asking questions, the atmosphere changed. They spoke with doctors first, reviewed charts, noted irregularities in her symptoms, in the medications administered, in the timeline of her collapse. Nothing screamed foul play, nothing fit neatly either. Then they moved on to the people closest to her. Interviews began quietly. Her partner was calm, cooperative, almost rehearsed. They described the day in careful detail. What time she woke up, what she ate when she first felt unwell. But when those details were compared to hospital records, small discrepancies appeared. Minutes that didn't line up, events placed slightly out of order, not enough to accuse, enough to note. Friends were questioned next. Some described her as anxious in the weeks leading up to the incident. Others mentioned comments she'd made about not feeling safe in her own body. A few recalled tension they couldn't quite explain. Each account painted a slightly different picture. Caregivers and colleagues added more layers. Someone mentioned being turned away during a visit. Someone else recalled instructions coming from the partner, not the doctors. A routine that suddenly felt controlled. Early suspects began to emerge. A medication error, an underlying condition, a rare neurological event. Each theory explained part of the story, but never all of it. Evidence raised more questions than answers. A dosage that was technically within limits, but unnecessary. A gap in supervision during a critical window. Personal items moved, then replaced. Nothing illegal on its own, nothing definitive. And yet, every time investigators tried to close the case under a medical explanation, something pulled them back. because the pieces didn't sit naturally together. They formed a picture, but one with edges that refused to align. And somewhere in that mess of timelines, statements, and half-truths was a truth struggling to surface, a truth the victim had known all along, but had no way to speak. Inside that hospital room, time lost its meaning. Hours blurred into days, days into something shapeless and endless. Her body lay still, but her mind never stopped. She became aware of the smallest things, the rhythm of the monitor, the sound of footsteps outside the door, the way voices changed when they thought she couldn't hear. She tried to communicate. At first, it was instinct. A flicker of her eyes when someone spoke her name, a spike in her heart rate when a certain voice entered the room. The machines noticed before the people did. A nurse commented once that her vitals changed during visits. Another brushed it off as coincidence, stress, reflex. She tried again, blinking, slow, deliberate, when questions were asked, focusing her gaze on one person, then another, hoping someone would notice the difference. But every sign was explained away. She's not conscious. It's involuntary. Don't read too much into it. At one point, a pen was placed in her hand. A test. Her fingers twitched barely, but it was something. The moment passed. No follow-up. No documentation. The system moved on. Inside, she was screaming. She knew exactly what had happened to her. She remembered the moment her body failed, the taste in her mouth, the sudden heaviness, the realization that this wasn't an accident. And worse, she knew who was responsible. She listened as that person spoke softly to doctors, reassuring them, thanking them, standing at her bedside holding her hand. She felt the pressure of that hand tighten sometimes, just enough to remind her. Fear settled into something colder. Betrayal. The person she had trusted with her care, with her body, with her life, was now controlling the story. And she understood something terrifying. As long as she couldn't speak, as long as her signs were dismissed, as long as the system chose convenience over curiosity, the truth would die with her. She wasn't just fighting for her life anymore. She was fighting to be believed, and she was losing. As the days passed, the pressure began to show. The person closest to her, the one who never left her side, started to change. Their calm cracked. Questions from doctors were met with impatience. Routine checks became interruptions. Every new test felt like a threat. Nurses noticed it first. A sharp tone where there had once been gratitude, an insistence on being present for every conversation, a sudden urgency to limit visitors. The closer anyone came to understanding her condition, the more tightly control was exercised around her. And then, evidence began to surface. A medication order that didn't originate from the attending physician. A dosage adjusted without proper authorization. A note entered into her chart, then quietly altered. Small things, technical things. But together, they formed a pattern. Someone was interfering. At one point, a nurse questioned why a scheduled neurological assessment had been delayed. The explanation came quickly, too quickly. She's resting. She doesn't need to be disturbed. She's been through enough. Behind closed doors, emotions unraveled. Witnesses later described moments of visible agitation. Pacing. Raised voices quickly lowered when staff approached. A breakdown in the hallway, followed by an apology that felt rehearsed. And then came the near miss. Late one night, her heart rate spiked dramatically. Alarms sounded, staff rushed in. For a moment, it seemed she might not survive the night. As doctors worked to stabilize her, someone stood frozen at the foot of the bed. Not panicked, not pleading, watching. She survived, barely. But that moment changed everything, because it proved one undeniable truth. Whatever was happening wasn't over. Someone was willing to push her body to the edge again. And if nothing changed, the next incident wouldn't be a near miss. It would be final. With pressure mounting and questions multiplying, investigators began to narrow their focus. And soon, attention shifted away from the bedside. A new theory took hold. Records revealed a recent prescription change, one that had been authorized days before her collapse. The doctor responsible was questioned. Their name appeared repeatedly in the paperwork. Their signature was everywhere. It looked damning. Rumors spread quietly through hospital corridors, then louder through official channels. Had a medical error caused this? The idea made sense. Overworked staff, miscommunication, a dosage that pushed her body too far. Police interviews intensified. The physician was brought in for questioning. Medical logs were dissected. Expert consultants weighed in. Even the public began to form opinions. A professional misstep felt easier to accept than something darker, more familiar, less disturbing. For a moment, it seemed like the case had an answer. But then, the timeline unraveled. Digital records showed the prescription had been accessed after hours. At a time when the doctor wasn't on duty, security logs placed them elsewhere entirely. Independent review confirmed it. The dosage alone couldn't explain her condition, not without additional interference. Just like that, the suspect was cleared. The case went quiet again. And while attention drifted, while investigators recalibrated, the real threat remained exactly where it had always been, right beside her. The breakthrough didn't come from a confession. It came from a detail that had been overlooked, dismissed as meaningless. A nurse, revisiting old notes, noticed a pattern no one had connected before. Every time one specific person entered the room, her heart rate spiked. Her blood pressure shifted. Her eyes tracked the movement, not randomly, deliberately. A neurologist ordered one final test. Simple, almost embarrassingly basic. Yes or no questions. Can you hear me? One blink. Are you in pain? One blink. Then the question no one had asked before. Is the person who hurt you in this room? Her heart rate surged. One blink. Silence followed. The room changed. Investigators reviewed everything again, this time with one name in mind. The medications, the access logs, the chart edits, the moments of control disguised as care. The motive surfaced quickly. Control. Financial dependence masked as support, fear of exposure, desperation to maintain authority over her body, her choices, her future. When confronted, the mask slipped. The calm demeanor fractured. Explanations tangled. Details contradicted each other. Then came the proof. Security footage showing unauthorized access. Digital fingerprints on altered records. And the one thing they could never erase. Her response. She had been trying to tell them all along. She hadn't been unconscious. She hadn't been confused. She had been watching, listening, witnessing her own murder attempt in real time. The person she trusted most wasn't just responsible. They were standing beside her while it happened. The arrest came quietly. No dramatic chase, no public spectacle. Just handcuffs in a hallway that had once been filled with reassurances. Legal proceedings followed swiftly. Charges were filed, evidence presented. A case built not on speculation, but on records, patterns, and proof. In court, the story sounded different, cold, structured, stripped of emotion. But the facts were undeniable. The person who had claimed to be her protector was now held accountable for exploiting her vulnerability, using access, trust, and authority as weapons. For her family, the truth landed with unbearable force. Grief mixed with guilt. Moments replayed endlessly. Questions without answers. They mourned not only what had been done to her, but the time they lost believing she was safe. Within the hospital, reckoning followed. Protocols were reviewed, failures acknowledged, warnings about patient advocacy and neurological awareness were issued. It was an admission that the system had missed its chance, that believing machines over human signals had nearly cost a life. The community reacted with shock, not because the crime was loud, but because it was quiet. because it happened in a place meant to heal, because it was hidden behind routine and trust, and because it forced an uncomfortable reflection. How many times had signs like hers been overlooked before? This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a warning. Sometimes the truth is screaming, even when no sound comes out. She was never unconscious, never unaware, never gone. She was present in every moment, watching decisions being made about her life, listening as her reality was rewritten by someone else. This story isn't just about a crime. It's about power, about what happens when control is mistaken for care, when systems prioritize convenience over curiosity, when voices are ignored because they don't arrive in familiar forms. There are people all around us trying to communicate in ways we don't expect, through pauses, through patterns, through signals we're taught to overlook, and sometimes the most dangerous assumption we can make is believing that silence means nothing is being said. The truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits, in a hospital room, behind unblinking eyes, until someone finally chooses to listen.